Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, I'd like to welcome you to the second edition of the Conference Call to Europe, a yearly initiative that the Foundation for European Progressive Studies successfully launched in 2011 with the aim of addressing the tremendous challenges that the 21st century is mounting and that the European Union must meet. 1 year ago, we decided to look at Europe's goals at large, from economic and social issues to the need for further political integration and to the role of the European Union on the global scene. This time, we decided to focus solely on the EU's external relations. In these terms, the topic may appear narrower than we actually intend. Indeed, too often, in the last decades, European foreign policy has been considered by the EU member states as a sort of amplifier of their limited national interests, a mere instrument to support their influence on the international stage. Today, this approach is too constraining and weak. The world is rapidly changing. The balance of power among states is irreversibly shifting. New actors have emerged or re-emerged. Others are emerging. These developments are taking place now, before our very eyes. Today, Europe seems to have lost some of its appeal, and as a consequence of its capability to set an example for regional integration elsewhere in the world and to shape the international agenda. Europe's shaping power comes from a mix between a strong economic performance and the necessary political will to shape the international milieu according to its values and interests, among which free market, multilateralism, regionalism. Europe's behavior has been a mix of soft power and smart power elements. The former indicates the ability to reach its goals without the use of coercive means, while the latter does not exclude coercion and is in between soft and hard power. If American foreign policy has been accused times and again of resorting too heavily on hard power, European foreign policy has suffered from the opposite allegations. Truth to be told, since the end of the Cold War, security conceptions have changed and widened, including non-military dimensions such as economic security, societal security, environmental security. This analysis acknowledges a security provider role for Europe in non-military sphere. To make a classic example, the enlargement of the European Union is often cited as Europe's major foreign policy success, having stabilized an entire geopolitical region. Between soft and hard power, Europe has invested on the former, relying on its self-perception of being a sui generis actor and having a normative nature, interested in shaping the milieu around itself. It has exposed a rule-based conception which dates back of the elaboration of the Magna Carta, of politics and of international system, one in which respecting international law defines the actorness of states. Economic prosperity has led many to forget that soft power is mainly based on economic success and political will. The dramatic change of the economic context across Europe has significantly reduced the magnetic power of attraction Europe has enjoyed in the past. Today, to recover that power, Europe needs to provide shared and effective economic and political responses to the crisis of the Eurozone and develop a working strategy for growth and employment. Many are now hoping that a new intra-European core will manage to find a way out of the current stalemate. The election of François Hollande might act in this direction, particularly if supported by the growth of progressive forces across Europe. 2013 will represent a crucial year from this point of view, since elections in key European countries might complete the political U-turn. Even merely economic analysis of the current crisis share the assessment that the Eurozone breakup would be an economic disaster. A common fiscal policy based on a federal system might prove efficient once the parties agreed to put it in place. Moreover, the return to government of progressive parties could also mean the commitment to a more supranational approach. These developments have obvious consequences on European foreign and defense policy. Budget cuts are the first thing that comes to mind. Defense budgets in Europe represent only, on average, 2% of GDP. This has led many in the United States to accuse Europe of behaving as a security free rider, profiting from US security guarantees. In that sense, a certain degree of functional specialization would be crucial to overcome the current paralysis. Europe has invaluable capabilities in the field of civil-military relations and security sector reforms, as it does in the fields of police training and judiciary reforms. These capabilities are essential tools in conflict prevention and in post-conflict reconstruction and stabilization. It is high time Europe cultivates and focuses on these tools. Unfortunately, proposals concerning Europe's global strategy are currently developed mainly through unilateral intra-European brainstorming. This seems to underline how difficult it is for the EU member states to look beyond the financial and economic crisis and to consider foreign policy as distinct from the evolution of the economic situation. While in the United States discourse on decline is prevailing and China is increasingly seen as a competitor in a zero-sum game, the attitude that holds sway in Europe is that of waiting. The hope, therefore, is that the EU's efforts will focus on the strengthening of Europe's presence and interests in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and that they will define ways and instruments to increase trade relations with the BRICS and also with those countries such as Taiwan, Indonesia, Colombia, or the members of the Eastern African Community, whose growth rate has been around 6% for years, but have been so far largely ignored by Europe. Also, it will be necessary to readjust Europe's self-perception, which is significantly diverging from the image other global actors have of our continent. Europeans still tend to consider Europe as a leader and a model for the other countries of the world, while the rising powers of the 21st century, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and so on, are increasingly questioning Western ideas on values, rules, and sovereignty, and are developing their own sense of nationhood. In such a context, European countries' overrepresentation in global institutions is being increasingly questioned, as it is no longer justified by the European countries' real economic and political weight. It is not an accident that one of the most significant initiatives that the Foundation for European Progressive Studies has recently inaugurated, together with some national foundations, has been named Renaissance for Europe. During the first meeting, which was held in Paris last March, just before the French presidential elections, we strongly stressed the need to formulate a common program aimed at relaunching European economy and at supporting employment and growth across the continent, as well at restoring the EU's now lost, or at least very weak, political and democratic legitimacy. Yet, the relaunch of Europe's role in the world is the other side of the coin of European Renaissance. Today, our continent seems to be paralyzed, withdrawn into itself, because of the major economic and financial crisis which has gripped European countries. But, in fact, well before the crisis struck, the EU has lost momentum. Instead, what we want, what we aim at, is a union that recovers its strength and is again capable of acting on the international stages. And indeed, because Europe is no longer the major global power it used to be, and because new powers and new actors are emerging and contesting that primacy, the first of these stages should be the EU's neighborhood. Let me give you an example. 50 years ago, tackling North Korea's belligerent attitudes would have been a common US and European task. Today, when a problem with North Korean nuclear force arises, it is China that deals with it directly. In such a circumstance, Europe would be of no use. There would be no need to even consult Europe. By contrast, as far as Iran is concerned, Europe must take the lead and play a key role in the ongoing dispute with Iran over its nuclear program. We should support Lady Ashton's efforts to play a most delicate diplomatic game and eventually negotiate a shared political solution, dissuading the Iranians from pursuing their nuclear ambition, and let me say also dissuading others from pursuing a military solution, which would dramatically and dangerously change the balance of power in the Middle East. So, our duty is to take care of the regions that surround Europe and that we have the closest relations with. Geographical proximity is the very first dimension in which we can and must show that Europe can be still an effective power. But even so, our attitude must be different. We must refrain from the usual rhetoric of the neighborhood policy, which tends to be Eurocentric, suggesting a one-way and asymmetric approach with our partners. Steps in the right direction have been made last year with the launch of a new European neighborhood policy in which mutual accountability and support for democracy should play a larger role. We decided to propose the need for a strengthened partnership with Africa as the opening topic of our debate. So far, the African continent has been largely left out of the globalization process. There are still many problems that prevent a great leap forward from the need of democratic consolidation to demands of economic development.